Hi, all comrades, friends, everyone who join our meeting, our webinar today. Today, Revolutionary Marxism organized a webinar on the fall of the USSR in 1991 and the war in Ukraine. Before I introduce our comrades who will speak today, I'd like to say some words about revolutionary Marxism for the ones who haven't heard about it before. Revolutionary Marxism is a journal of theory and politics with a quite long history. It is the English edition of a journal, Devrimci Marxism, that has been published in Turkish for many years. Revolutionary Devrimci Marxism in Turkish is now planning to publish its issue number 50. And since 2017, Revolutionary Marxism has been published as its annual English edition. And both journals are located in Istanbul, in Turkey, but not only the English edition, but also the Turkish one will collaborate with the writers across a broad geography all over the world. The last issue, Revolutionary Marxism 2021, has a dossier focused on the fall of USSR, which provides a historical background that sheds light on the present situation in the world, particularly about the war in Ukraine. Therefore, the title of our webinar today is The Fall of USSR in 1991 and the War in Ukraine. Now I'd like to give the floor to our speakers. Today, three dear comrades will be with us in this webinar. One of our comrades is from the other side of the agency, Savas Mihail Matsas from EEK. Another comrade will be from Russia, whom we are honored to have him among us, who witnessed both all the achievements of the workers' states and unfortunately the road to capitalist restoration, and who still continues to fight for socialism today. He's from RPK, Russian Communist Party, Yosif Abramsov. But now we are experiencing some technical problems due to the blockade on Russia. Therefore, when we'll solve the problem, he will also join us. And finally, our comrade Sungur Savran from Revolutionary Marxist Party, Revolutionary Workers' Party, DIP of Turkey, who is also in a way the host by being member of the editorial board of both Devrimci Marxism in Turkish and Revolutionary Marxism. Our three comrades and I will make 10 minutes presentations today during this webinar. You can send your questions, contributions by messages through our social media channels. If there's time, we'll try to answer them by making a short final tour after the speech. Now, I'd like to give the floor to our comrade Savas Mihail Matsas. Savas, please take the floor.
Oh, thank you, Comrade Arman. Good evening, comrades. Today we have a most important topic to discuss as we are experiencing a dramatic inflection point in history, a great turning point. We live still with the implications of the collapse of the Soviet Union 30 years ago, and today in the most dramatic way with the explosion of the war in Ukraine. We have from the beginning to stress that the war in Ukraine is not a local war. It's not even a European war, as some people say. It is a part of a dramatic reconfiguration of the world's political scene of international and national conflicts. It has a worldwide dynamic in it. There is a lot of debates and disputes among people all over the world. I don't mention the propaganda machines and apparatuses, but particularly people who fight to change the world, about the nature of the war conflagration today in Ukraine. And you have to stress that this war cannot be separated from the entire process leading to it, because every propagandist in the West and the mainstream press and the media and TV, etc., everywhere, tries to persuade us that suddenly somebody completely insane and mad declared an unprovoked war, as Biden called the war, when the Russian army entered the Donbass and the Ukrainian lands. To really define the character of this war, we have to use the whole process, is just not what they present to us, the bourgeois mass media. How we reach this point, which is a point of a tragedy for the Ukrainian people, of tragedy for the Russian people, and probably a point of tragedy for the whole humanity. Why and how we reached the point where humanity and life on this planet is on the brink of the abyss. We cannot, the process which preceded this war has a long history. It coincides with the collapse of the Soviet Union itself. And from the 1991, there's a whole dynamic which is unfolding until today, until this war, which is not an unprovoked war, as Joe Biden says, and the other media repeats. It was provoked by the West, by NATO imperialism, led by the US, but to really to prove the truth that everybody wants now to hide, we have to see all this process from the moment of the 1991 collapse of the Soviet Union. And everybody knows that 30 years ago, the 25th of December, it was announced the dissolution of the Soviet Union by Yeltsin and his counterparts in Ukraine and in Belarus. If the 25th of December 1991 was the declaration of the dissolution, January the 2nd of 1992, it was announced the IMF-sponsored economic program of the so-called shock therapy for the destruction of the previous Soviet structures of the economy, to liberalize the prices, and created, in matter of fact, a catastrophe for millions and millions of people, particularly throughout the 1990s. If the first moment of this transition, immediately after the dissolution, it was inside the Soviet, inside Russia, but as well in the other former Soviet states, implementation of this savage program of destruction of the previous social and economic structures and introduction of capitalist relations. The same period, in January, February 1992, Paul Wolfowitz, then the defense secretary in the administration of Bush father, or senior, produced a document of the American Pentagon with the title Defense Policy Guidance, which said the main point in this document it was we have to never allow Russia to become again a superpower. And it was the whole concept which further developed throughout all these 30 years. In 1997, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who is really the strategist of what to experience today, and also in previous decades, he said that it is absolutely necessary to destroy, to fragment the former Soviet space, and particularly the Russian Federation, that according to Brzezinski should become at least 3 independent states, 1 European, 1 in Siberia, and the third in the former Soviet Far East. And I quote him saying, specifying and stressing the position to this ground strategy that Ukraine itself occupies. Brzezinski wrote on, and it was published both first in Foreign Affairs, the mouthpiece of the State Department of the US, in September 1997, and then in his well-known book, The Great Chessboard. So he wrote, without Ukraine, Russia ceases to be a Eurasian empire. This is his own terms. This is in their so-called geopolitical conception that those who control the Eurasian massland can have a world hegemony. So from the beginning, not today, not 2 weeks ago, from the beginning of the collapse of the Soviet Union, we have this strategy to be unfolded and trying to implement it. We have, during all this period of the mass destruction of the former Soviet economy, of savage privatization, which, in matter of fact, it was a massive theft of the public property and the formation of different oligarchic groups out of the nomenclatura, the upper stratum of the party-state bureaucracy, which ruled in the previous period. During the same period, which this policy was implemented under the guidance, under the leadership of the IMF and the global financial capital, and which led to the default of Russia in August 1998 during the world crisis, which had its epicenter in the Asian Pacific region in that period. This process inside the former Soviet space, it was also accompanied with a NATO expansion to the east. It is noteworthy the following point. In the beginning of 1999, when Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Poland joined NATO, despite the promise made by James Baker to Gorbachev during the reunification of Germany that there will be no expansion of NATO from to the east. So when in 1999, these 3 former Eastern European countries, so-called of the actual existing socialism, joined NATO, just 12 days afterwards, it started the war in Yugoslavia, in former Yugoslavia, the so-called Kosovo War, with a massive bombing of Serbia and all the former Yugoslav space by the NATO forces. The expansion to NATO from the beginning was accompanied with war. It is wrong to say today and hear and to see in the mass media that the war in Ukraine is the first war in Europe after the Second World War. Who can forget or forgive NATO's barbaric aggression, which destroyed, pulverized the former Yugoslav Federation of Peoples and created really chaos until now, not just in the Western Balkans, all over the Balkan Peninsula. And this pulverization was accompanied both by European Union imperialist economic domination and as well as NATOization of this area. So they started from Yugoslavia, but they did not stop there. And every step forward of the expansion from NATO had as it was a process which the main target of this strategical process, it was to reach Russia itself. They started from Belgrade to go to Russia. And when the new phase of the crisis of world capitalism started, during the period of the 2007-2008 explosion or implosion, if you like, with the finance capital globalization, the crash of 2008 and the Lehman Brothers collapse, it was the same period that in the Bucharest summit of NATO, new proposals for expansion of NATO, particularly in Georgia and in other countries, came. Until now, it is 13 countries who joined NATO, and the Baltic states, etc. And which was followed, as we remember, by the Russian war in Georgia and the cessation of Abkhazia and Ossetia at that time. So there is always a déjà vu in this process that we see today. It is not just something which just happens. And furthermore, after these developments, a crucial moment it was 2014, when there was a regime change in Kiev itself. Until then, the moment the capitalist-oriented regime in Kiev looked one time towards Russia, another time towards the European Union. In the moment when they turned to Russia again under Yanukovych, so you had a lot of mobilization of the Maidan Square, as is now, where liberal and fascist forces intervened conditions of economic chaos because of the IMF measures introduced in that country. So at that moment, it was really a fascist coup, because Victoria Nuland, who was at that time, and today again, but in another administration, in the Undersecretary of the State in the United States, and the ambassador in Kiev, it was prior until recently, US ambassador in Athens. It was Victoria Nuland who insisted for this intervention. And when the ambassador asked, what about the European Union? Sorry for the expression, but it was Nuland who said to her, the math, everybody remembers now today, he said, fuck the European Union. So it was a brutal, vulgar intervention, and they could not achieve that without the help of the neo-Nazi forces, which was both in the party of Svoboda and in other groups, which later on they were integrated inside the National Guard and the repressive in the army and the repressive apparatuses of the Ukraine under the new regime, and starting the repression against the minorities, particularly the Russian-speaking people of the working class, mainly working class, in the Donbass area. There was resistance, was the formation of the various republics in Donetsk and that period from 2014 to 2015, and the Minsk agreements, because Kremlin always wanted to have a compromise, and this compromise was combined with the repression inside these Russophone areas, both by the Ukrainian far right, as well by the Kremlin. Communists were repressed or put out of the law in the sad period. So, and then to arrive after 80 years of a so-called hybrid war, where 14,000 people officially were killed, probably were much more in Donbass. The orientation was posed urgently that Ukraine should join NATO, and that provoked the whole development of the conflict that now takes this such terrible forces, the dimensions. Having said that, because they try to present the truth, really to reverse reality itself, to ignore who is the real instigator of the war. And the real instigator, it is the NATO imperialists under US leadership. That does not mean, as many people say today, that you have to choose camp. You choose either you support Russia, you support Kremlin, you support Putin, etc. Not at all. Our revolutionary Marxist trend always criticized very sharply and clashed with the oligarchs in Russia, with the Bonapartist regime led from a period by Putin until now. We never made any concession to them. And for them, it is no question of campism to choose between two camps in this house. What on the contrary we say, it is just to face this war where the Western imperialists try to colonize and fragmenting and ruling with authoritarian regimes of really who's just tools of them in all of this area. That does not mean that you can defeat Western imperialism in this bloody conflagration by military, bureaucratic means and the policy which attack directly and from the beginning the communist Bolshevik policy and the solution that Lenin and the Bolsheviks fought for, the solution of the national problem, the national question in the new orchestrate which arose out of the victory of the October Revolution. So we criticized, and there is a very important article also by Comrade Sungur in Red Red from the beginning attacking Putin's first speech of the 21st of February and defending Lenin. Similar articles were published by our party in Greece. So we don't make any concessions because they try to put us pressure to really to isolate our political revolutionary voice, to silence us in the name that we are Russophiles, we are pro-Putinists, etc., etc. No, we are for the world socialist revolution, for communism, yes, for that. And we don't think that we have as many in the left, even the so-called far left in Europe and in the United States of America and North America, they side in the name of democracy or in the name of the national cohesion and national operation of the Ukrainian people. We start in matter of fact with NATO, in the instigator of the war, the main culprit of this war. We criticize, of course, we criticize Putin and Bonapartism and the Russian oligarchs, etc., etc., the capitalist-oriented regime, the capitalist restoration in this space, which opened the door to the foreign capital, particularly the American and the European capital. And we say that we cannot fight imperialism, we cannot defeat imperialism without a revolutionary mobilization of the masses, and particularly the working class, both in Ukraine and in Russia, against a common enemy, against imperialism, against the oligarchs, to expropriate all the oligarchs and give the power really to the working class people and all the oppressed in that area, and fully respecting the right of self-determination of all the oppressed nations. So, because of the time, I have to conclude by the following policy conclusions. Now
Thank you
is the
very
time really of internationalism in
yes,
action.
yes.
We have to transform the imperialist war into an international socialist revolution, which means practically the following. We have to fight in every country, particularly in countries where there are members of NATO and also of they have military bases of the US and NATO. Disband NATO, disband all the bases, kick them out from our countries. No involvement with this imperialist war with the side of the Western imperialists. No arms, which they say send arms to the Ukrainian. This is just NATO arming a perpetuation of the war. We have decided no sanctions to Russia because it is not just with the oligarchs. They pressurize the oligarchs to change Bonaparte, to change Putin for another thing. But the price will be paid by the people, by the poor masses. And at the same time saying no occupation of Ukraine by the Russian troops. And for this, it is an international struggle. In Europe, we are against the militarization promoted. Now, for the first time after the Second War by Germany, we are against the awful role the European Union imperialism plays, and we fight for the socialist unification of the European continent from Lisbon to Vladivostok, against imperialism, against the oligarchs, against all the tools of imperialism. World socialism, communism is the only precondition to have peace on earth and to save humanity and life from extinction by imperialist barbarism. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Comrade Savas. Uh, Comrade Sungur, would you like to say something? No? You are muted.
That was just for applauding, Savas. It was just an
Sorry?
applause.
Okay.
No, nothing, Savas. I'll tell you later. We'll tell you later. I just
Okay.
applauded you, you know.
Thank you very much, comrade.
After this great speech,
It is the only way, just one
revolutionary
word, to kick
internationalist,
out NATO from
anti-imperialist.
both our countries, to have peace in the Aegean and in the Mediterranean. That's the only solution. And in the Black Sea as well. Thank you, sorry.
Thank you, comrade. Normally, we'll continue with Josef Abramson, but still we are trying to fix the problem. Therefore, while our technical comrades, trying to fix it, I'll continue by presenting our joint article with Comrade Sungur. It's published in Revolutionary Marxism, in the last issue of Revolutionary Marxism, and the title of the article is The Role of Revolutionary Marxism in the Collapse of Soviet Union, Never Again. But first of all, I'd like to mention that it was written for the Cuban journal, La Comuna, at the end of 2020 for its special issue dedicated to the collapse of the Soviet Union. But however, they changed the main topic of the issue as a result of the events related to the action of artists gathered within the San Isidoro movement. But despite the fact that they postponed the publication of this special issue and prepared an issue on San Isidoro movement events, they published our article as the only foreign contribution. The article was presented by the editorial board of the journal by mentioning that although it doesn't seem to be related directly to the events discussed in the San Isidoro movement issue, our article raised a question that has run through the crisis in Cuba, the defense of the revolution against capitalist restoration. This introduction reveals the backbone and the positioning of our article very clearly. As I mentioned, the context of the article with the Cuban communists journal La Comuna. It was first published in their journal, and what we did here is that after briefly describing the objective material conditions that are the main reason for the collapse of the Soviet Union, we discussed the response of the international socialist and communist movement to the approaching collapse and the final collapse of the Soviet Union and the worker states. The fundamental development that engendered the entire process, whereby the ground was objectively prepared for the collapse of the socialist construction around the world, was embedded in the contradiction between the necessity of world revolution and the isolation of the first successful proletarian revolution of the 20th century. The isolation was at first the result of the betrayal of social democracy, especially in Germany, where two of the greatest revolutionary leaders of 20th century, Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, were murdered by far right in 1919. Um, and after the end of the civil war and the death of Lenin, a part of the Soviet leadership itself became more and more the real brake on world revolution. And here the question is, why was this the case? Why did part of a section of the leadership that had accomplished the October Revolution abandon the program of world revolution? The answer to this question uh, the answer to this question was provided by Trotsky in the Revolution Betrayed. Uh, and inspecting the basis of the Marxist theory of socialism and the state, Trotsky demonstrated that under certain specific historical circumstances, the society in transition from capitalism to socialism can face the threat of the rise of a bureaucracy that has its own interests in contradiction with with those of the working class people, and can consolidate its power over the nationalized economy and block further steps towards the socialism. And at that moment, Trotsky himself surely thought that there are two alternative ways for the bureaucratically degenerated worker states. Either the proletariat will bring down the bureaucracy through a political revolution, or the bureaucracy will move to ground its privilege in the form of private property and under some proper conditions to restore the capitalism. Both of these alternatives obviously open a space for the intervention of the Marxists. and political intervention by the Marxists, in particular the revolutionary Marxists, will make a difference. Here, Trotsky's positions, the priorities are clear when we face that kind of contradictions. For him, the defense of the worker states is a priority when compared to the overthrow of bureaucracy in that states. He even predicted situations where, for instance, in case of imperialist war waged on Soviet Union, revolutionary Marxists will make a common front with the bureaucracy itself. And how did the Trotskyist movement act when met with this question, with the dissolution and the collapse of the worker states, especially the Soviet Union? Half a century after the Fourth International was founded with the explicit purpose of defending the first worker states, even from the collapse of the bureaucracy itself. Um Unfortunately, so to speak, Trotskyist movement acted shamefully at that moment. The majority of Trotskyists, perhaps with some good intentions, supported capitalist restoration in Soviet Union, in Eastern Europe, in Yugoslavia, in China. They support capitalist restoration in the name of defending democracy, whether in the form of Gorbachev's glasnost or in the form of liberalism or the so-called democratic right to self-determination in these countries. And what we've learned from the world history is that no imperialist power, no ruling class, no political leadership tries to put their own reactionary agenda without seemingly positive measures being inserted in their program to hide their strategic reactionary aim. There's always set of bribes for different sections of the populations, for women, for other sections, etc. And it's what we also learned from the world history. It's also always a mistake to assess these offers, bribes, in an isolated way. Democracy and human rights, for instance, have never been and will never be good or bad in the abstract form. They can only be assessed in the context of class relations. And here, the real point of defending socialism lies not in scattered, not in limited rights of this or that section of the population of the people. It lies in extending the socialist revolution to other countries, to other continents. It lies in removing, eliminating the isolation around the workers' state and spreading the revolution. And by reaching that point in our article, we emphasized as the final message of the article that fighting for the world revolution is the only way to defend Cuban revolution. And the duty of all revolutionary Marxists today is to defend Cuba not only against imperialist embargo, imperialist blockades, or military aggression. It's also necessary to stand up against a capitalist restoration internal movements, uh, because imperialism, as we see today, doesn't stop after the collapse of Soviet Union. If capitalist restoration in Cuba is irreversible, it will regress to a much more backward situation than the present situation of the other former worker states. It will be colonized. It will probably become a backyard of US imperialism again, as a casino of US imperialism, or prostitution centers again, because it has neither nuclear weapons nor Soviet Union to stand behind it anymore. And from this point, I'd like to say one last word on the war we are facing today with this historical context. It is, as Comrade Savas said, it is the product of the aggression of imperialism after the collapse of Soviet Union, and it is the product of the struggle for the hegemony over the geography of the former worker states. And when we look at what was happened in the last few weeks, by breaking it out of this context, like what Trotskyist and Marxist movement did in the case of the collapse of the worker states, it's once again inevitable for the socialist movement, for Trotskyists to be dragged into a political position. Therefore, we need to consider the context of this war. We need to consider the role of imperialism and the struggle among these forces. Here, this what I can say now. Thank you. And I'd like to ask if Comrade Josef Abramson can speak now, is ready now.
I'm very pleasant
Not.
to hear you. It is all right what you say. All right. I want to say about objective and about subjective reasons for the failure of most socialist projects, not only the USSR, also in Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and all of the states who are with USSR. The objective, the initial objective for the difficulties that the Bolsheviks faced immediately after the brilliantly carried out October uprising was not unexpected. The significant industrial, scientific, technological, and cultural backwardness of Russia. They fully corresponded to the scientifically grounded Lenin's prediction that the imperialist chain would break through in its weak link. This is objective. That's subjective, collective mistake of the party leadership, including Lenin, was that it remained unchanged party charter when the 8th Congress of the RKPB adopted a new second party program. The, the charter was not without new you just so as it was before the revolution. This was not uh, so not good, not well. Rosa Luxemburg uh, said it was said that it was to be very warning for the were not heeded Rosa Luxemburg warnings. That became and that became the objective reason for the transformation of democratic centralism to bureaucratic centralism. In 1921, Lenin recognized the party's collective subjective mistake of delaying the surplus appropriation system of military communism, which complicated the relationship between the working class and the peasantry, instilled a mood of a certain distrust to the Bolsheviks. In the countryside, which at first widely supported the slogans of October, especially land for the peasants. The 10th Congress, which adopted the net seriously and for a long time, corrected this mistake. So, first, early 1922, agreeing with the need to introduce the post of General Secretary in the Central Committee of the KTB, Lenin made by this a mistake, rushing the recommendation of Lev Kamenev to appoint Joseph Stalin on this post. And Lenin recognized of this subjective mistake relatively quickly. And at the end December of the same year, he was preparing a closed letter to the Congress in which he recommends removing Stalin from the post of General Secretary. However, Stalin managed to strengthen his position in the governing bodies of the party during the first year of his tenure as General Secretary. That the 13th Congress, 1924, the first Congress after the death of Lenin, does not accept the recommendation of the outgoing founder of the party. Stalin remains at the head of the entire party apparatus. This consolidated the victory of the bureaucratic tendency over the democratic one, became the objective reason for the beginning of the process of bureaucratic degeneration of the KPSS. So, and we have only then sometimes when first in 1934, the Congress, 17th Congress of then the elections of the Central Committee, 20% of the Congress, 1934, 20% of delegates voted against Stalin. It's 20. And the head of the commission was what to say to the Stalin. Say in 20, 2000 sorry, to 20, to, what's it, to, say it again, 20, was it, 19% of the delegates of Congress voted against you. You must against Kirov. Only 3 or 3 votes. Stalin said, if so, officially, that 3 for Kirov and 3 for me, against me. The Congress heard this, but after this, it was 1934, after this, since 3 years, not 2.5 years, in 1937 begins the great terror against party and against Soviet people. Now we know that in 2.5 years, 1937, 1938, 60, 68,000, more than 68,000 of Soviet people was killed. It was an atmosphere of the was very old people, and the active part of people was very, it would be in each night. Each night can be the last night in the lives. It was very hard years. Then, after death of Stalin, after 1953, against new parts of the lives in the USSR, the best years of this parts was the years 1966 and 1970. Then the head uh, of the government was Kosygin. This years, the 8th, it's elected 8th, 1966, 1970, there's an enthusiasm, there's a reform Kosygin's, there's really views against bureaucrats in party, and bureaucracy mobilized itself in 1968. It was very great tragedy. The counter counter crash, rather uh, Czechoslovakia. It was aggression from USSR to Czechoslovakia in 19. It was very great done against all communist movements in Europe and in the world. This is objective and subjective uh, reasons in the synthesis. It was very bad from our live the years to became the Yeltsin and to the shock and the end of the process.
Thank you for your intervention, Comrade Joseph. Then we'll continue with Comrade Sungur with his presentation. Please take the floor.
Okay, thank you, Arman. Thank you, Comrade Yosef. Of course, thank you, Comrade Savas, as well. Let me start with self-criticism and an apology. Apology to Arman, because she's the moderator of this meeting, and she's very able as a moderator, as I have witnessed so many times in the past. But I, came in with my usual impatience and took certain initiatives at certain points, and so I'm sorry, because I was so frustrated by the fact that this embargo, this blockade, impedes us from taking the words of Comrade Yosef to comrades all around the world, especially in our part of the world. So, that's the impatience should have been kept under control. That's one thing. The second thing is, of course, in this kind of meeting, it should be paid. I mean, this is also a woman comrade who's moderating, and therefore I should have paid even more attention to this, especially, of course, when we are so close, days in advance of the International Working Women's Day on the 8th of March, when our comrades in all countries, but here in Turkey as well, were very busy working together with proletarian women in taking the front in protesting against this male-dominated capitalist imperialist society in many parts of Turkey. So this was, as Arman was writing in one of her pieces, a very important year for Turkey in the development of the conception in society of the International Working Women's Day, because now more and more, with the rise in working class struggles, where DIP is very active, many working class women come into the struggle for women's liberation as well, including, of course, in the columns of DIP in many marches and demonstrations. After this opening section, let me quickly salute all in the audience. We have gone too long because of the technical problems mostly, so I will speak very briefly. I hope there are still many people, or some people at least, in the audience. I can't see the number now. So I greet them all with revolutionary feelings. And we are, of course, as Revolutionary Marxism, which is a journal that originated in Turkey with an internationalist outlook, but nonetheless has its base in Istanbul. We are honored by the presence of our two guests, Josif Abramson and Savas Mikhail Matsas. Savas has written for almost all our issues in English. He has also been published in Devrimci Marxism, the Turkish version, but in the 5 years that we have been bringing out Revolutionary Marxism, I think he has at least one article in each issue. And Josif Abramson, I think, has at least two and is competing for second place after Savas with Tamás Kraus of Hungary, who has written quite a lot too. So we are very much honored to have them here and to have their articles, especially these last articles in the last issue of the journal, which in the dossier that Arman was talking about on the 30th anniversary of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now, let me say a few words on the war and then pass on, because this is a webinar of revolutionary Marxism, to certain ideas about where revolutionary Marxism stands in respect of the overall orientation of the left in the world and in Turkey. Let's start out with von Clausewitz. War, as he said in this very famous dictum, is the continuation of politics by other means. So what was the politics before the war started between Russia and Ukraine? It was, of course, and I'm so glad that Savas spoke before me and gave the audience almost all the relevant milestones in the development of the drive against Russia by casting the net of NATO all the way to Eastern Europe, to the very neighbors of Russia, such as Ukraine and Georgia. That is the basic background. And in the 2 months that went on between December and the beginning of the war on the 24th of February, the people who negotiated were Putin and Biden, and the organizations were Russia and NATO, or Russia and the United States. And therefore, the politics is between these, and therefore the war is between these. The Ukraine war is simply a situation where Ukraine is the terrain of a very, very explosive war that is starting in the horizon of our planet. Ukraine is only the territory. This is the first step towards a war between NATO and Russia, which probably will turn into a world war, and probably that will turn into nuclear war. So we have to be very careful in what we are saying. The left, a great majority of the left in Turkey and the world, is now turning to us and saying, this is a war between Russia and Ukraine is now being victimized. Well, come on. They are working, they're fighting with all the armaments provided by NATO on the basis of a provocation of bringing NATO to the doorstep of Russia. I use the metaphor of holding a nuclear gun to the chest of Russia. I'm not talking about Putin. That is simply demagogy. I'm talking about the Russian people, Russia as a country. And a weapon is being held to their chest, to their bosom. This is the situation. And therefore, the Russia-Ukraine war is a proxy war. Now, if you take that position, you cannot simply say, end the war immediately. You have to have a solution to the problems that caused the war. And those problems are very obviously the threat that the imperialist West has been pouring on Russia for the last 3 decades. Now, in Turkey, we are even accused of warmongering and Putinism and nostalgia for the USSR, as if, we had any illusions at all with respect to the Putin regime, turning itself into a workers' state of any meaningful sense of the term. This is, saying that there is a war, so it should stop, is pacifism of the purest kind. The majority of the international left has become pacifists. All Marxist, all the gains of Marxist politics over the 175 years since the Communist Manifesto have been thrown into the rubbish by these people. And this is actually the result of a very long development. But before that, let me say, together with Comrade Savas, and here, there is this irony of, history where two neighboring countries, which are supposed to be enemies to each other, Greece and Turkey, have two parties which have been emphasizing this since the civil war in Yugoslavia and since Kosovo, as the same attitude that EEK took in Greece towards the war in Yugoslavia was taken by DIP in Turkey. Its antecedents, let's say, because DIP was formed later. And the Yugoslav civil war and later the Kosovo war was conceived by us as a preparation of the attack that imperialism was preparing against the Russian Federation, in the same manner as Comrade Savas explained very eloquently in his speech. Now, what is behind this? Why didn't the left, as Arman explained in her speech, especially why didn't the Trotskyist left or the revolutionary Marxist left, as as we call our current also, realize what was happening? Because there was a parallel development through which the left abandoned the premises of Marxism, abandoned the Marxist program and theory, and started to become a liberal movement. There was a whole liberal, left-wing liberal, we call this in Turkey, movement that was spreading throughout the world in the 1980s. This is called by the French, for instance, la gauche américaine, or la deuxième gauche, that is to say, the second left. Or in Latin America, it's called the izquierda democratizante, that is to say, the democratizing left, which, when you take it into the camp of Marxism, those people, those movements, those parties that call themselves Marxists, should be named post-Leninist, because they do seem to own Marx, only seemingly, but they are usually attacking Lenin with a guerrilla war. Now, what happened here? First of all, they abandoned the concept of the Leninist Bolshevik party in favor of a new type of party, the broad party that, one is supposed to form with the rest of the left. They abandoned the concept of the dictatorship of the proletariat as the ruling, as the working class, as a ruling force. They adapted totally to bourgeois democracy. They became part of the functioning of the capitalist society in political terms, and they capitulated to postmodernism and identity politics. Now, this is not all, though. In the process, if you become adapted to the bourgeois democratic system, and if you totally abandon the target of the dictatorship of the proletariat, then there is really no purpose in fighting imperialism. So imperialism as a concept was deleted so to speak, to use computer technology language, was deleted from the vocabulary of Marxism. Globalization was supposed to put an end to imperialism. Mark, for instance, the very big success of Hart and Negri's bestseller. You know, it was sold in supermarkets. I've seen them in supermarkets in Turkey and in airports. The bestseller Empire by Michael Hart and Antonio Negri, which said, this is the end of imperialism. This is the beginning of empire, which caused almost the whole left, the post-Leninist left, to derive from that the stupid adjective imperial, which when you talk to them and ask them what it means, they can't answer. So Russia is an imperial power. What does that mean? It is not imperialist. We submit, we contend, but then they say it's imperial. So the question is this: there is a constant drift towards liberalism within the left and total divorce from the Leninist brand of Marxism. That is to say, and when we use the word revolutionary Marxism, the concept, that is taken from Lenin. That is taken from Lenin in his fight against the Mensheviks and the social revolutionaries, etc., and the Kautskys and the Bernsteins. So we appeal to all those internationally, and that is part of the purpose of this webinar, who do not capitulate to to bourgeois democracy, and who do not reject the existence of imperialism. NATO is the culprit. We should fight NATO. We should fight for taking our countries out of NATO in every European country and in North America. But we should not let ourselves be deluded by the conclusions or by the consequences of that. Even if we succeed in bringing our own country out of NATO, NATO will again attack all working class forces in the world. That forms a threat to capitalism and imperialism, and therefore we should destroy NATO internationally. This is our outlook on the world. We regret what is happening in Ukraine. We regret what is happening in Russia. We regret what is being done to people by this war. But the culprit is NATO. Do not mistake the target. The target is NATO. In order to stop this war and stop it from becoming an uncontrollable world war with nuclear ramifications, we should fight NATO in order to put an end. Do not forget, comrades, that both world wars, and this is not something that is said every day, both world wars were stopped by revolutions, proletarian revolutions. The First World War was put an end to by first the October Revolution and then the November Revolution of 1918 in Germany. Look at the date of the armistice. It's the 10th of November 1918 for the First World War. Why? Because on the 9th of November, Karl Liebknecht, together with hundreds of thousands of workers, marched to the palace of Wilhelm II and conquered Germany. So that is why the armistice was signed the next day. As for the Second World War, it is obvious that the Red Army was a product of the October Revolution, that from France all the way to the China Sea and Korea, we had revolutionary movements challenging both Nazism and Japanese fascism and imperialism. And therefore, both wars were really stopped by, in the end, revolutions. This time, let us make it an world revolution that will put an end forever to the possibility of war on this planet. This is our outlook. We ask all who subscribe to classical Marxism to collaborate with revolutionary Marxism. We are open to discussion, to debate, to discuss our differences in our ideas and in our practice, but let us keep in touch. We will be here for a long time, a Turkish journal publishing in English, but open to collaboration with the rest of the world, because we are proletarian internationalists of a revolutionary Marxist kind. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, comrades, for all your speech, all these wonderful speeches and contributions. I'm not sure if we have any questions, any contributions from the audiences. If not, I guess we have accomplished 1.5 hours already. Okay, then we are not going to make another tour after all these wonderful speeches. Many thanks to everyone for these speeches and contributions. It's Revolutionary Marxism's first webinar. And despite all kinds of technical difficulties and the embargo and blockade, the restrictions of imperialism, I think we have successfully completed the first one. First of all, I would like to thank Comrade Savas, Yosif, and Sungur for their contributions by pushing all the limits, all the conditions. I would also like to thank all of our audience for not leaving us alone in our first webinar, and of course for your thanks for your patience and understanding during all these technical problems. As Revolutionary Workers' Party, DIP, we close our these kind of live broadcasts, online broadcasts, by saying that let's meet in the fields of struggle. Devrimci Marxism in Turkish, and its English edition, annual English edition, Revolutionary Marxism, claim to be a militant theory journal of theory. And our comrades here who come together in this webinar have been coming together in the fields of struggle for so many years. Therefore, I'd like to close this webinar by saying the same words. Let's meet in the next one, and let's meet in the fields of struggle. Once again, thank you to everyone. If you want to say some words, please. To salute, of course.
Thank you.
Can I say one word?
Sure, of course. Please, Yosef.
I want to say the thanks, very thanks for the initiators and organizers this first our webinar. It is only begin, and I think that in the future, very difficult future, our time, our political time, and our struggle against imperialism, West imperialism, and Russian imperialism, we can be together, our communist, internationalist struggle. Thanks. Thanks.
Thanks.
If Savas has nothing to say, I would just like to say one word, Arman. Is that okay?
Sure,
And
please.
that is, I think we should thank our technical wizard, Safa, Comrade
Yes.
Safa, of the party
Okay, of course.
of DIP, who, has done such, gone to such lengths in preparing this by, cheating imperialism. This is, the great
Mhm.
thing about this technical, political feat, success of our comrade. Thank you, Safa.
He's a
Thank you, Sefa.
revolutionary magician
Mhm.
against imperialism. Comrade Savas, would you like to say anything else?
Just yes,
Yes, please.
I think it was a great, even the difficulties that we faced during this webinar is a reflection of the epoch in which we are living and in where we are fighting. And it is very important, as it was stressed even before by Comrade Sungur and by you also, that it was central in this work today as well, that the revolutionary Marxists from two countries like Turkey and Greece, that imperialism and the ruling classes want to turn one against the other. We are fighting for the only way that we can achieve peace on earth, and which through the world socialist revolution, the fraternization of all the peoples beyond all borders, to transform the Black Sea, the Aegean Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, not to battlefields, but to lake of peace of the oppressed. And to achieve that, we have to fight for class war against imperialist war. This is our way. And to defeat today the main enemy, we at home and we collaborate with NATO imperialism and it brings humanity on the brink of an abyss. No, today the old dilemma, socialism or barbarism, is transformed either permanent revolution or a permanent war which destroys life on earth. We are for the permanent revolution and to build a revolutionary international to guide it. For this reason, we call that we fight inside the Christian Rakowski International Socialist Center to held a Chimmelwald of our times, the Chimmelwald of 2022 of all revolutionary internationalists to give to in this critical period in which we are living. Thank you, our comrade Arman. Thank you, all the organizers of this very important meeting. All your brothers and sisters from the other side of the GMC, we are fighting together because only the working classes can bring peace against all the warmongers of both sides. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Savas. And thanks again to all the comrades, all the audience. Let's meet in the next webinar. Let's meet in the fields of struggle, and let's struggle for the victory of the World Internationals. Thanks a lot.
Best journal Revolutionary Marxism.
Okay.